I remember the first day like it was carved into my skin. New backpack, secondhand clothes, shoes too tight, and a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. My mother walked me to the school gates, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "Be proud of who you are, no matter what." I didn't know that within an hour, my pride would feel like something I needed to hide. The moment I said my name in class, not even a full sentence, the room erupted in laughter. Not loud, not cruel, just sharp enough to cut. The teacher didn't say anything. She smiled like she didn't hear it, or maybe like she didn't want to deal with it. But I heard it, and I never forgot it. They weren't laughing at something funny. They were laughing because I was different, and because they knew they could. I tried to repeat my name, slower, quieter, like changing the speed would make me sound more like them. It didn't work. It never did. At lunch, I sat alone. My food smelled different. My words sounded different. My silence tasted bitter. A boy came up and asked, "Do you even speak English, bro?" I nodded. He mimicked my accent, twisted it into something ridiculous, and laughed so hard his friends joined in. That was the first time I lied and said I wasn't hungry, just so I could throw my lunch in the trash without anyone seeing. After school, I told my mom it went fine. I smiled so she wouldn't worry. She was already working 2 jobs. She didn't need to know that her son spent recess hiding in the bathroom, counting tiles on the wall like they were the only things that didn't judge him. I practiced every sentence before saying it. I memorized how Americans shaped their vowels. I stopped rolling my R's. I even tried not to speak at all. The worst part wasn't the bullying. It was the silence. The teachers heard everything. They saw the jokes, the mimicry, the side eyes, and they did nothing. Maybe they thought kids were just being kids. Maybe they didn't think my voice mattered enough to protect. Either way, I learned fast. If I wanted to survive here, I had to disappear. I remember one class project. We had to read aloud. My turn came, and my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper. The girl in front of me muttered, "This should be good." I read as best I could. I said "the" like D. I stressed the wrong syllables. A boy coughed the word immigrant under his breath like it was a punchline. The class laughed again. I smiled too, pretended I didn't care. But I remember going home that day, locking the bathroom door, and crying for so long the mirror fogged up from my breath. My mom noticed I wasn't talking much. She asked if someone had hurt me. I said no, not in a way she would understand. What do you say when the thing that hurts you is laughter? When your biggest fear is the sound of your own voice? I started writing notes instead of speaking. I only answered questions if the teacher called on me, and I prayed she wouldn't. My accent became my prison. Then one day, something shifted. A substitute teacher asked me to help another student who was struggling with math. I was confused. Me? The invisible one? I helped her, and for the first time in months, someone looked at me without amusement or pity. Just gratitude. That was the first crack in the wall I'd built around myself. But the laughs didn't stop. Every time I spoke, someone found a way to turn it into a joke. Every time I asked a question, someone echoed it in a mock accent. It wasn't just kids anymore. Even adults would ask, "Where are you from?" With that tone that meant you don't belong here. I wanted to scream, "I'm from here now, isn't that enough?" But I didn't scream. I studied. I read aloud at home, mimicking news anchors on YouTube. I learned every idiom, every phrase, every twist in the language that made them feel native. I copied how they moved their mouths, practiced in front of mirrors. I wanted to make my accent disappear, just so they would see me as a person, not a punchline. And somewhere in that desperate need to sound like them, I started to forget what my real voice sounded like. I forgot the rhythm of my first language. I forgot the lullabies my mother sang. I forgot the words my father used to say before he died. All of it, fading, just so I could be accepted. They say kids are resilient, that they bounce back. But what no one tells you is that sometimes kids don't bounce. They bend. They fold themselves into shapes that fit, and once folded, they never quite unfold the same way again. I bent myself into someone new, and for years, no one laughed anymore because I stopped giving them anything to laugh at. I became silent, smart, useful. I became what they respected, but never what they welcomed. I thought I had to earn that. So I kept chasing it, through school, through books, through perfect English, until the day I found myself back at that same school, not as a student, but as a teacher. I still remember the smell of that school, the hallway wax that never quite masked the sweat of hundreds of restless teenagers. When I walked through those doors again, not as a student, but as a certified teacher, the air felt heavier than I remembered. Not because of fear, but because of everything I still carried from before. It was like walking into a memory that hadn't forgotten me. My name was printed on the staff list now. Mr. J, the same name kids had once laughed at. I stood in front of a classroom that looked almost identical to the one where I used to shrink into my seat. Only now, the desk at the front was mine. The whiteboard behind me was blank, waiting for me to teach. My hands trembled slightly, but I didn't let it show. The students came in, loud and chaotic, just like we had been. I scanned their faces, wondering which ones were hiding pain behind jokes, which ones stayed quiet to avoid being seen. One girl sat near the back, silent, eyes low. She reminded me of me. I made a mental note to learn her name first. When I spoke, some kids looked surprised. Maybe they expected a different voice. Maybe the accent I'd fought to erase still lingered. I didn't hide it this time. I spoke slowly, clearly, the way I wanted to, not the way I was told I should. And no one laughed. That silence meant more than applause ever could. During lunch, I walked past the table where I used to sit alone. It was occupied now, some kids joking loudly about a game. I smiled and kept walking. But inside, I felt something deep and strange, like I was a ghost walking through the scenes of my own past. Everything had changed, and yet it hadn't. One teacher from before still worked there, Mr. Collins. He was older now, grayer, but still wore the same suspenders and tired smile. He passed me in the hallway and said, "Didn't expect to see you back here. You speak a lot better now." I nodded politely, pretending that didn't feel like a punch. Some people never change. At the end of the day, I sat alone in the empty classroom. The silence felt different now, not lonely, but earned. I looked around and saw the stories these walls had witnessed. Mine was written here too, between the laughter and silence, between shame and survival. I was no longer the joke, I was the lesson. Over the next few weeks, I got used to the rhythm again. Lesson plans, faculty meetings, the smell of dry erase markers. But some moments still hit hard, like when a student mocked another's accent, or when a parent asked where I was really from. I'd smile, breathe, and remember. I'm here to change what this place did to me. One day a boy came to me after class. "Mr. J," he said, "how do you talk so proper now? My cousin sounds like me, and people always laugh at him." I paused before answering. Then I said, "You don't have to change how you speak to be smart. You just have to believe that your voice matters." He smiled. So did I. That was the first time I realized I wasn't just teaching math or grammar. I was teaching presence. I was teaching survival. I was teaching every kid with a different name, a different sound, a different story, that they didn't have to erase themselves to be accepted. That being different wasn't a weakness. It was a power. Some days were still hard. Some kids still mocked, still mimicked, still laughed. But I didn't flinch anymore, because now I had the power to protect the quiet ones, the ones who didn't laugh back, the ones I used to be. When I passed the mirror in the teacher's lounge, I sometimes stared at my reflection longer than I should, not to check my tie or my posture, but to remind myself this is the same face they used to laugh at. And now it teaches here, and that matters. There's a moment that every teacher dreads. Not the silence, not the noise, but the sound of familiar cruelty. It happened during my 4th week. I was writing something on the board when I heard a boy in the back mutter, loud enough for others to hear, "What's he even saying?" A few students chuckled. Not all, but enough. My chalk paused mid-word. I turned slowly, letting the silence build. That silence, that pause, used to terrify me when I was a student. Now it was mine to command. The boy looked away, trying to act uninterested. The others avoided my gaze. I took a breath and kept my tone even. "If something is unclear, feel free to ask," I said. "Mockery doesn't help learning. Curiosity does." After class, I found myself in the staff room, staring into my coffee like it held the right answer. Part of me wanted to laugh it off. But another part, the part that remembered being that kid, ached. Not because I was hurt, but because I recognized it. That voice, that smirk, that moment when someone decides you're not quite human enough to respect. I didn't report it. I didn't scold him harshly. I decided to wait. Because sometimes, change doesn't come through punishment. It comes through presence. Through showing up again and again until the laughing stops because there's nothing left to mock. Only someone standing tall in front of them who refuses to flinch. The next week, the same boy stayed behind after class. "I was just joking," he said, not looking me in the eye. I nodded. "I know," I replied. "But jokes teach people things. What do you think that joke taught the class?" He didn't answer, just mumbled, "Sorry," and left. It wasn't much, but it was a crack in the wall. Not every kid was like that. Some listened with wide eyes. Some asked questions I never would have had the courage to ask at their age. One girl, quiet and sharp, turned in essays that read like poetry. I praised her in front of the class. She flushed but smiled. Moments like that made the bad ones easier to carry. There were teachers who pulled me aside and told me I was inspiring, that I was exactly what this school needed. I smiled politely, but part of me always wondered, would they have said the same if I still spoke with the thicker accent I came here with? If I wasn't dressed neatly? If I hadn't worked twice as hard just to sound half as acceptable? Sometimes I'd stay late just to walk the empty halls. They echoed differently after hours. Less noise, more memory. I'd pass the lockers and remember the ones where I was shoved, the ones I avoided. I wasn't trying to relive it. I was trying to reclaim it, to say, I'm not that kid anymore, but I carry him with me. One Friday there was a school assembly. I was asked to speak, to share my journey, as the principal called it. I stood under the stage lights, heart pounding, every instinct telling me to run. But I didn't. I told them the truth. That I was laughed at. That I was told I'd never belong. That I used to avoid speaking just to avoid being heard. I watched their faces shift, some surprised, some uncomfortable. Some of the teachers looked down. Some of the students leaned in. I ended by saying, "You don't need to sound like everyone else to be worth listening to. And if someone tells you otherwise, remember, they laughed at me too, and I teach here now." After the assembly, a group of students came up to me. One boy, small, nervous, whispered, "My dad makes fun of my voice, but I like how I talk." I bent down and said, "So do I." He smiled, a real smile, not forced, not afraid. That moment stayed with me longer than the applause. The next time I heard someone laugh during a lesson, I didn't flinch. I kept speaking, because I knew that the ones who needed my voice were listening, even if they weren't ready to speak yet. And I owed it to them to keep showing up, to keep being the teacher I once needed, the one I never had. Sometimes, I rewrote entire lesson plans at night just to avoid long words that might trip me. It's not that I didn't know them. I just didn't want to give anyone another reason to snicker. I'd whisper pronunciations under my breath, sitting alone at my kitchen table with YouTube videos paused mid-sentence. Entrepreneur. Photosynthesis. Colonel. The English language is full of traps, and I walked into all of them, carefully. But the classroom slowly shifted. It wasn't overnight. It was in the small things. A student asking me how to pronounce a word, and not laughing when I said I wasn't sure either. Another student volunteering to read aloud, proud of their own accent, no longer trying to bury it under something flatter, more American. I started assigning writing prompts like, "Describe the voice of someone you love." One girl wrote about her grandmother's Spanish lullabies. A boy described his uncle's deep southern drawl. No one laughed. I made sure of that. And little by little, the class began to understand. How you say something is part of who you are. One day, during a parent-teacher meeting, a mother leaned in and said, "You speak so well for someone who wasn't born here." I smiled, but inside, something twisted. That sentence, always wrapped in politeness, was poison dipped in sugar. I wanted to say, "You speak so well for someone who hasn't thought deeply in years." But I just nodded and changed the subject. I kept a notebook of things I never said. Every backhanded compliment, every tight-lipped smile from a colleague who couldn't quite hide their surprise at my competence. Every time I was asked where I was really from, and when I said here, the silence that followed. That notebook got thick. But I never threw it away. One morning, I entered the classroom to find a sticky note on my desk. It read, "Your class is the only one where I don't feel stupid." No name, no handwriting I recognized. I sat down slowly, letting it sink in. Not because I needed validation, but because I'd forgotten how powerful quiet support can be. Not everything changed. Some students still joked behind my back. Some teachers still looked past me in the hallway. But I had found something stronger than their doubt. I had found a rhythm, my own. I no longer measured my success in silence or smiles. I measured it in the way I no longer apologized for my voice. There were still days when I stumbled, when a word caught in my throat, or my accent turned a sentence into a puzzle. But instead of shame, I felt something else. Ownership. This voice, this mix of countries and cultures, of mistakes and survival, it was mine, and no one could take it from me again. A turning point came when I was asked to coach the debate team. Me, the one who used to fear speaking out loud. I said yes, heart pounding. At our first practice, I told them, "You don't win debates by sounding like someone else. You win by believing in what you say." They listened, and they spoke, and they won. One boy, quiet and always in the back, ended up becoming our strongest speaker. His voice shook the first time. By the finals, it rang out like a bell. He looked at me after his closing statement and whispered, "I did it." I nodded, choking back tears. "You did." The night after their victory, I sat alone in the empty classroom. The chairs were still slightly crooked. The whiteboard still held half-erased thoughts. But something had shifted, not just in them, but in me. I no longer taught to prove myself. I taught to remind them, and myself, that voices carry power, even the ones that stumble. Graduation season always made me emotional. Rows of students in oversized gowns, beaming parents holding shaky phones, and tassels that refused to stay in place. I used to sit at the very back, unnoticed, hands folded. But this year was different. They called me to the front, not as a staff member, but as a speaker. A teacher whose voice had once cracked in fear now had a microphone. When I stood behind the podium, I saw faces I knew. Some I'd taught, some who once laughed at me, some who cried in my classroom. My hands trembled as I adjusted the mic, but my voice did not. I started with a story. The first time I read aloud in English, I was laughed at. The room fell silent. The second time, I was ignored. The third time, I kept reading. And they listened. I told them about shame, about how it creeps in like fog, convincing you that your difference is weakness. I told them about silence, how it used to be my shield and then became my prison. I told them that the greatest gift I ever gave myself was refusing to disappear. That I stopped chasing perfect speech and started chasing honest connection. After the speech, a student came up to me, tears in her eyes. "I used to hate my voice," she said, "but now I think it's kind of beautiful." That's when I realized I hadn't just survived this system. I'd rewritten a piece of it, not for everyone, but for someone. And sometimes, that's enough. Later that week, I visited the principal's office to finalize my contract for the next year. As I sat waiting, a teacher passed by and said, "I heard your speech. Never thought I'd cry at a graduation." I smiled politely, but inside I thought, "You never thought I would speak at all, did you?" But I let the silence speak for me. I still carry an accent. I still mispronounce words sometimes, but I no longer see those as flaws. They're fingerprints, proof that I've lived in more than one world, that my voice was forged in translation, in repetition, in humiliation, in courage. Every sound I make has roots that go deeper than language. There's a plaque now outside my classroom. It says, "Room 214, Mr. Iredell." The first time I saw it, I ran my fingers over the letters, as if touching them would make it more real. I used to be the student who hid in bathrooms to avoid speaking. Now my name is on a door. Sometimes I still can't believe it. A few weeks ago, I ran into one of my old bullies, someone from that first school where they mocked my accent. He barely recognized me. "You're a teacher?" he asked, like it was a mistake. I just nodded. I didn't need to explain. My life had already done that for me. These days, when a new student with a heavy accent walks into my class, I smile a little wider. I speak slower. I make space. And I tell them what I wish someone had told me. Your voice matters, not when it's perfect, but especially when it's not. I still keep that old notebook, the one with all the insults, the microaggressions, the pain. But I've started writing something new in the back of it. Thank you notes, from students, from parents, from myself. The past is still there, but it's no longer the loudest voice. Because now, when I walk into a classroom, I don't hear laughter at my accent. I hear silence, not of judgment, but of listening. And when I speak, they don't flinch. They lean in. They want to know more. And that, to me, is the sound of winning.